Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie, the world's a better place because you're in it. You see what happens when you subscribe. You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. In this episode, we talked to the one and only Kate Cohen. She has a really phenomenal career. She's very passionate about mentorship, and she provides some really great frameworks, both on how we can be better mentors, how we can help women in our organizations be more supportive and help them break through that negative self-talk, and some great frameworks on how you can change the culture within the organization. So I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey, Kate.
Hey, how are you?
Good. What's happening?
Nothing, just a beautiful Friday here in Kansas City.
I love it. Well, I'm excited to get you on the Ethics Experts. We had a really great pre-show, and so I just want to dive right in, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, sounds good.
So one of the things you mentioned in our pre-show is that you kind of stumbled into compliance without any leadership or without any mentorship or guidance or anything like that. I'd like to start talking about, what that experience was like to kind of walk in blind and how that shaped your approach to leadership today.
Yeah, so I took my first compliance job after practicing law, and I was a young attorney and had never worked in this space before, worked in sort of a healthcare adjacent legal field. And I think I was kind of let loose because I had a law degree and they assumed I could figure a lot of things out. And I could figure a lot of things out, but I didn't really understand the role of compliance, right? So I kind of went into it with the idea of, we're the people who make the other people follow the rules. And gosh, that's a really bad way to approach compliance. And so I was unsuccessful in that role. And I think that if I had had some guidance and some prep around, this is what we do, this is what our role is, this is what our role isn't, I probably would have been set up for a little more success. Now, not to say that my failure in that role was entirely the fault of the people who maybe should have been leading me. I definitely stumbled over myself, and a young professional trying to find her way and her voice and assert her knowledge and authority. But that experience was painful for me, and it taught me a lot. And because of how impacted I was, honestly, for years to come from that experience, I really attempted to be a leader that would never let one of my people have that kind of experience. So they get a lot more maybe attention and guidance from me and making sure we're on the same page than maybe they like to have. But it really is because I was shaped by that early failure in my career.
So I want to dive into that a little bit. Like you said, when you kind of stepped into the role, you thought that we were the people that made the other people follow the rules. And that sort of frame led to what you called a failure. So like, how did you start engaging in compliance underneath that sort of guise or underneath, through that sort of perspective? And like, when did you see and how did you see that it was a failure? You know what I'm saying? Because like you've determined that now, but that was like a journey to this determination. So like talk to me about that journey, how you engaged with folks and how that sort of misnomer ended up causing what we're talking about.
Yeah, so my approach was pretty serious. I will also say that, because I had been working in the legal field and was often in a courtroom, I wore a suit to work every day. So I already sort of was dressing on the more serious side, walking around, kind of doing walkthroughs, not announcing myself, not explaining what I was there for. It really was sort of a trying to catch up approach, because that was just how I implemented the tools I was given and the instructions I was given. And I think, there was one particular leader who complained about me and my approach. And I think I had good relationships with some of the other leaders personally. And someone was nice enough to say to me, hey, you're really funny. Like when we engage just one-on-one, you're a funny person. You got to show more of that. That's not the Kate people are seeing. And it was the first feedback I got or suggestion I got that made me think, okay, I need to start thinking about that, and that I'm coming off in a way that doesn't reflect who I really am, or that isn't the best version of who I am. And, so that helped. I will say, though, that at no point during that experience did I get some of that guidance that I needed. I also didn't realize that I needed that, and I was lacking that. So I didn't ask for it. And I think young women often are in the scenario where you want to make sure you're seen as competent, that you're able to do your job. And it's hard to ask those questions. It's hard to know what you need.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that. And I didn't have that in me at that time to say, I think I need some help. And I just didn't know how to ask for that.
Was there like an epiphany moment where you were like, okay, this is just the wrong approach? Or was it really just kind of a gradual sort of like falling away, the scales sort of falling away from your eyes and you kind of seeing the light? Like, what was that path like to that epiphany?
It was gradual. I would say there was a moment where a colleague who worked in the compliance department in another area, different facility, came to my facility, and we walked around, and I think we were going to get coffee or something, and people were stopping me. Hey, what's up? How are you? How's your kiddo? She got to see that I had real relationships with people, and a lot of people. It happened to be like a really busy minute in the hallway that we were walking towards the coffee shop. And I think we saw 6 people who stopped me to talk to me. And she looked at me and she said, "So not everyone hates you here, huh?" And I was like, whoa, did somebody say everyone hates me? And that was, for me, the beginning of, this isn't successful. This is not how I want to be seen. And that was one of the only sort of wake up calls I had. Otherwise, it was very gradual. Yeah. I will also say, though, it took me removing myself from that situation to be able to kind of start fresh and be better.
So I want to hear about that kind of new chapter, because sometimes it's hard to kind of have that true reset where the slate is wiped clean and you can really kind of, move in this new way. What advice, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give young Kate showing up day one with the suit?
Yeah. The first would be to ask more questions. Ask more questions about your role, about the place, about the people. Ask people about their journey, the history, why we do things the way we do. The why is so important, and I just didn't know that. So that would be a piece of advice. The other thing that I think about, my younger self, and really what I would say to her is to let the positive voices be louder than the negative ones. So even when I had positive things being said to me, people encouraging me throughout my career, this is not just in that first role, I tend to always let the one negative voice be louder than the positive ones. And so that, I think, is something I've had to learn over time, is to let those positive voices be louder than the negative ones. And then the other thing is to just have a better work-life balance. I mentioned people were asking me about my kiddo. I had a little kid. I had a toddler. Yeah. And I worked a lot, and I worked more than I should have. And I paid more attention sometimes to work than I did to my family. And that work-life balance has taken me a really long time to figure out. And part of that was finding kind of my mental health outlet. So as I was sort of knowing at that time that this was not going well, I was feeling like a failure. I was feeling really terrible about myself and about the situation. And, I was the primary breadwinner of my family. So how do I get out of this? What do I do? How do I reset? What do I look for a new job? And at that point, I didn't have an outlet that sort of was my me time, my reset for the day, the way I have now, and that I prioritize now. So I go to Pilates now. That's my thing right now. And it has over the years been exercise, even though I'm not somebody who would jump to exercise. It always has been exercise, that mental health outlet. Right now it's Pilates, and everybody knows if I don't go to Pilates, I'm in danger of having a rough day, right? My family knows that. And so
yeah, you might show up in a suit again.
Exactly. Imagine. So yeah, I think for me that, those are the things I would tell young Kate. And I don't know that young Kate would listen, but that's what comes to mind.
So you said it took kind of taking yourself out of that situation and starting fresh at a new situation. So I'd like to kind of contrast how you move different in that new role. How did you apply the lessons that you learned kind of right out of the gate?
Well, I think my sort of approach in that new role was fact finding, right? Getting to know people, getting to know processes, not inserting myself with opinions or suggestions until I really understood, again, the why, the how, the history. I will also say the key thing in that role was I had a mentor. I had a mentor who was just an amazing woman who really kind of supported me and took me under her wing and helped me have an example of how to show up honestly in this kind of role. And that was life changing.
And so what was she to you? She was your mentor, but was she inside the company that you went to, or what? Talk to me about that relationship and how you sort of realized, like, okay, this is a well of like knowledge. This is a well of wisdom I need to really tap into.
Yeah, she was my boss inside the company. And, mentorship can be formal, it can be informal. This was informal. I don't even know that she'd know I called her my most influential mentor, but she was. And it was just watching her navigate really challenging situations, watching her approach, setting the approach for the department, the tone, how we were going to do things. And I also had the benefit of walking into that situation, that relationship with her, having had then a couple of years of that early time where things were adjusting, things were better, right, towards the end. And I realized kind of where I need to be. I was engaging with a lot of professional resources like HCCA and other folks who'd been in this space for a long time who also really helped me, conferences and talking to people. And that sort of put me in the right place to be able to watch what this person did, receive her feedback, use her as kind of a sounding board, and really be able to start more successfully in that role.
So invaluable, I mean, think of how much different your life could have been if you hadn't taken that job and hadn't worked with this mentor who was able to pour into you and really kind of influence your perspective. So you've become very passionate about mentorship, particularly in, the compliance profession. What are some of the like lessons or the tenets that you try to instill in your younger people that you get to work with?
Yeah. So outside of the substance of what we do, how we approach things, right? I think one of the things that has come with kind of being in different roles, having different types of stakeholders, different relationships with stakeholders, one of the things that I want to make sure people that I work with and mentor know is that how people react to you is not within your control. And when I was younger, I hated this sort of idea of like, this is the circle of things in your control. This is the circle of things out of your control. I didn't resonate with that. And I do think I always understood how I showed up and the relationships that I built and the impact that I had on people or departments or organizations was within my control, right? But what I sort of didn't love about the circles of in your control and not in your control is that, for me, it was hard to remember as I was thinking about what was out of my control that everyone else was showing up with their own stuff, right? So like I came with baggage from that first experience that still to this day I carry around with me. It's totally less prominent in my life, but it will always be there, right?
Well, it was an experience you had. It's like we're affected by all that stuff,
Yes. And so everybody has that. They show up with that. You've got previous jobs, family stuff, kids stuff, whatever it is, right? Few people really show up with negative intent, with like the idea, I'm going to screw with you today. I'm going to mess with your day. I'm going to mess with your process or whatever it is. And so how do I use that and incorporate that when I'm engaging with somebody who is really triggering me. So, I went to this conference recently and they were talking about navigating change. It was a great conversation we had, and they used sort of the elephant and rider analogy, if you've heard of that, where the elephant's your emotions and the rider's your self-control. And, your rider can only control the elephant so much, and sometimes the elephant just comes out, right? And so recognizing when people's elephant comes out. Now, I'm a boy mom, so I like the Hulk analogy a little bit better. Like sometimes my Hulk comes out or other people's Hulk comes out, and not like Avengers Endgame Hulk, where it's like a nice balance of Hulk and Banner, like, the original Avengers Hulk, where it's like Hulk smash all through New York. That Hulk is going to come out sometimes, right? I really think it's important for people to go through the exercise of like, what are the triggers that are going to make Hulk come out? And like, once those things are threatened, it's going to take a lot to keep Hulk, inside Bruce Banner. I've gone through exercises like that, but recently have started really thinking about what are the core values that I have that are threatened. And if I think about the last couple of times Hulk has come out, one was a work Hulk, unfortunately. One was a personal Hulk, when I felt like one of my kids was threatened. And I can tie them back to one or two core values that I have that I felt like at the time were threatened.
Right.
And to me, like that seems simple, but when you really start thinking about all of those times that you've hulked out and could they be connected back to those core values, I can better sort of think about how to keep Hulk in when I know that we're getting close to those values being threatened in a situation. So having that self-awareness is, no matter what kind of substantive knowledge you have, no matter what kind of approach you have, we all have a Hulk that's going to come out, right? What is it that's going to trigger Hulk is such a huge thing for me and has helped me think about how to keep him in, so that New York's not destroyed and, relationships are not destroyed. So I think that's really important. And that's something that I want my team and others that I work with to think about, because, it's a given. Hulk will come out, and we can't pretend like that's not going to happen with us or with other people. But I also think for me, it's helped, like, when someone else's Hulk come out, it's like, okay, this is just your Hulk. This is not about me. Something that I've touched or that this situation has touched, triggered Hulk, and we need to just work through that. So,
and when the Hulk comes out, there's in my experience, there's usually some false positives involved there, where, like, to the extent it's tied to that core value, it's really kind of tied to some kind of a threat to that core value, to your point, right? Like, we feel threatened, we're worried the train's going to get off the tracks and all that. And to your point, if you can understand what those triggers are, then when you feel that Hulk kind of coming out, you can look and say, like, is this actually even happening right now? It like helps you to kind of deconstruct it, because that negativity bias that we're all wired with is in full effect constantly. And, business is so complex, right? Everybody has their own agendas and their own goals and their own things that they're working toward. It's very easy for a miscommunication to trigger, a Hulk scenario,
Yeah. And if you're not always thinking to yourself, I'm going to assume positive intent, I'm not assuming negative intent, I'm going to try to get to the bottom of what this is, without taking it personally, I think you're much less likely to feel like those core values are threatened and have Hulk come out, right? And so that's all kind of tied into it of I don't know what's going on with you today. You don't know what's going on with me today. You don't know what kind of morning I had with my family, or what kind of news I've just gotten, or whatever it is, that makes me show up in a way that could trigger your Hulk or your elephant, or whatever the analogy you like to use is. And so the assumption of positive intent is so hard to implement. It's so easy to say,
Totally.
but it's so hard to implement. We are wired to protect ourselves with the Hulk, right? And the reaction. It is brain chemistry. And so, how do you just keep reminding yourselves when it happens and when it inevitably happens, that maybe I looked at that the wrong way, and maybe you didn't, but
Yeah, but I mean, to your point, it's easy to say, the words assume positive intent. It's harder to truly walk around with a margin of grace for everyone and maintain that kind of posture.
Yeah, and it's hard, especially in a compliance role where there is just so much of what we do that is viewed as an extra burden or unnecessary or why, no
Right.
matter how much why you explain. And so, yeah, the assumption of positive intent when someone's reacting to what you're there to do every day and something that you feel good about and passionate about is hard.
You mentioned before kind of some of the unique challenges. I mean, we all know that women face unique challenges in the workplace. And I think women in compliance kind of particularly face kind of a whole different bouquet of challenges. How do you kind of approach those challenges? And what do you think like an organization can do, or what do you think other leaders can do to help kind of address those challenges? How can they be, more supportive and, kind of clear away some of this overgrowth?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the keys to addressing it is acknowledging it, right? I still think there are workplaces, there are leaders, there are female leaders, male leaders who don't acknowledge that women have a little bit of a different challenge in the workspace. Women who are serious or assertive or strong in their convictions of what they're presenting, they're told to watch their tone. They're called bossy. They're called another B word, right? And inevitably, that criticism for women, it's based on personality traits, right? Like that's how it's
Totally.
presented. And when you're subjected to microaggressions about your personality on a regular basis, it really can lead to women second guessing their abilities, trying to change who they are, and without, females mentoring you through
Right.
that process, that catch 22 for women can be really confusing in the workplace. And, so I'm from Kansas City. We've adopted Taylor Swift now as one of our city mascots. And
Yep.
she's got a word and a song for everything. And like her song, The Man speaks to me. And some of her lyrics are like, they would say I'd hustled and I'd put in the work, and they wouldn't question how much of this I deserved. When everyone believes you, what is that like? I mean, these are real things that women
Yeah.
in the workplace are experiencing. And I think, there isn't enough discussion about how much of that microaggression can really lead to poor mental health outcomes and women holding themselves back because they question
100%.
everything they're doing. And it almost happened to me. If I hadn't had somebody to help me out of that, I mean, that entire time where a lot of the feedback I was getting was about my personality, right? And about
Yeah.
who I was. That's how it was phrased. Um, I I was in a mental health crisis at that time. I was really struggling and questioning, am I worthy? Am I competent? All of these things that bleed into your home
Totally.
life as well. It was the worst, time with my husband. It was a time I showed up terribly as a parent because it's all consuming. And so we
Yeah.
have to acknowledge that, and we have to really, I have a responsibility as a woman in a position of leadership to look at the women who work for me, who are, working for peers of mine, who are peers of mine, and have these conversations. I recently had to have a conversation like this with one of my female employees of like, hey, and there's a man in between us who's her direct manager. But when we got this feedback about her, I said, you can't have this conversation with her. I have to. And it was, you're shy, right? You're quiet and you skew a little serious. Let me tell you about a time that really didn't go well for me. And I really had to think about how I'm showing up because I know you, I love you, you're competent, you're wonderful, you're engaging and funny. You have to work really hard to show everybody that in a way that your direct boss doesn't have to. And so I didn't want him to deliver the feedback of, they felt like you were mean.
Right.
I really wanted to have that conversation to contextualize if I've been there. Here are the things I did
Yeah,
when.
and you came out the other end with a different perspective and kind of exuding these qualities that, you're hoping to kind of dig out of her.
Absolutely. And I think just being able to say out loud, this isn't fair, but you and I can't show up in the way your manager can in certain meetings. It has to just be said out loud, right? And acknowledging that
Yeah.
is powerful. And it's powerful for the women who are struggling with it to just say, we can't be the same. We can't act the same. So how do we show up?
Well, what that kind of feedback does is it kind of turns the volume up on that negative self-talk that all human beings have. Everybody has negative self-talk. Everybody has, I was watching this conversation between, I think it was like Stephen King and George R.R. Martin, and George R.R. Martin or Stephen King famously just rips out tons of content. He rips out tons of books. He'll like write a book every two or 3 months or something. And George R.R. Martin is sort of on the other end of the spectrum. He's like having a reverse race to see how slow his book can come out. Okay. So he was saying that, but I mean, both like multimillionaire authors, highly successful, like envy of any other author who's trying to like be a writer, right? And so in the conversation, George R. R. Martin is like, says to Stephen King, what do you do on those days that you can't write and the voice in your head is calling you a fraud and saying you're not successful and you don't deserve any of the success? And I was just like, I hear that voice all the time. So you, as a highly successful, like objectively successful, like leader in your field, are also hearing it. That means that we're all hearing it all the time. And so we all have that voice going on. And then you get that feedback from a boss, whether it's male or female, or from, some kind of a survey. It kind of turns that volume up. And like we all only, to your point, you're like, when you're in a mental health crisis, it affects everything because we only have one brain. You know what I'm saying? I'm bringing the same brain that comes to work, to home, to dates with my wife, with whatever. And so just having someone, a mentor, the lighthouse in the storm, so to speak, that can help you frame out, talk about the elephant in the room, that it's not fair, show that, hey, there's a kind of a way out of this. And you can, it's harder for us, but we have to like build that muscle if we're going to like overcome the inequities or whatever you want to call it within the workplace. Can really do so much to sort through and reframe kind of the feedback that you're getting. I mean, it's very, very powerful. And one other thing I'll say is I've had the privilege, like throughout my life, of friends and colleagues, like females coming to me about challenges that they're going through, and like the thing that you said is so true. That is like that stereotyping of assertiveness, and that stereotyping of I don't know, that forward pressure that's necessary to like get anything done. It really does kind of like, it's like messed up the lens that, folks are walking through life with. It's like it colors every single thing. It's like, I don't want to show up that way. I don't want to, whatever's natural, whatever is your natural inclination in many cases, you have to like stamp that down, or you inadvertently stamp that down. And then that ends up compromising the effect, your effectiveness. It ends up kind of contributing to, the mental health, crisis you might be in. So it's a really big issue, and it's like plaguing everybody. It's plaguing at least half of the people in our organizations. And it's like, I just don't feel like we have the velocity to get out of this pit that we're in, to the level that I'd like. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think part of it, of not having the velocity to get out of the pit, is that we're not talking about it and acknowledging and calling it out. And, I remember getting feedback once that was, she doesn't smile enough when she walks down the hallway. Can you imagine someone saying that to a man? Because they would never say that to a man. I'm walking from my office to the bathroom. That's probably, the only break I'm taking out of my office chair. And I'm thinking about, my kids' after school activity. I got to remember to get the Taekwondo outfit in the car so that he's, got everything he needs for that. And then, this Saturday we have this soccer game, and I probably have these 10 other things I'm thinking about for work. And so, yeah, I'm not walking down the hall with a smile on my face. On the flip side, if I was, they'd be like, something's wrong with her. She's got a weird smile on her face walking to the bathroom. You can't win. And I think it's easy also, and this is where I think the mentorship is really helpful. It's easy when you're in a scenario where maybe you're not showing up in the way you want to, or you're not realizing that you're showing up in a way that is not ideal. It's easy to jump on, I can't win. Right? Either I smile too much or I don't smile enough. That mentor can really help you contextualize.
Totally.
You can't win when she's not smiling enough in the hallway. But that's probably not the situation in this scenario where there's concrete sort of feedback about how you showed up and how it landed. And my sister said to me in a non-work context once about something that your intention doesn't matter, right? Like it really doesn't matter. It's the impact. And I have to remind myself that because again, if you assume everybody shows up with good intentions, right? Great. I show up with good intentions. That doesn't mean that if the impact of something I did was negative, that doesn't
But you
matter.
get a pass or something.
I had good intentions. And so that's where I think mentorship for women, where you are often in a you can't win situation, can be really helpful to help you differentiate in those scenarios and to help you get to the point where, I really think I showed up the way I wanted. I think I showed up in a way that landed really well with 9 out of 10 people in the room. But on number 10, it didn't, right? And so how do I, instead of saying number 10 is the problem, not me, think about how something I said might have had an impact on that person or the way I approached it, because I don't know what triggers their Hulk. I don't know what their baggage is. I don't know their past experiences. And I don't know. It's just it took a long time to get to that place. And mentors helped me do that, and informal mentors just watching other people work. And so I'm also very cognizant of that. Even if I don't have I'm going to mentor you and you're my mentee type of an arrangement with somebody, people are watching me. My employees are watching me. Other women are watching me, and it matters.
Well, I mean, think about a lighthouse again. A lighthouse is not like picking which ships it's going to guide in. It's just shining that light all the time. And so that can be a benefit to the people around you, whether it's formal or informal, just kind of shining that light and keeping that message going and trying to tune into them. But, as you were talking, I was really struck by like, you're kind of a story of someone who was sort of going down a certain path, and then you got this mentorship, and it allowed you to kind of burst out of it and kind of go down this better path where you're helping so many other people to sort through, the feedback and all that other kind of stuff. But like, think of how many women have gone through work their entire career and really come out like a calcified version of what they could have been, where they've been stamped down and they've gotten so jaded and they've questioned themselves so much that, like, I don't know, like maybe their DNA changes or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, who we are is a function of all these different experiences, our nature, our nurture, our growing up, all those kinds of things, our work experiences, the stories that we're told by bosses and parents and all those kinds of things. All those kind of come together to make us who we are. And so it's easy to talk about mentorship as this like sort of soft thing. And yeah, it's, nice and sweet and all that kind of stuff. But like, it has a massive impact on people. It has a massive impact on the quality of life that people can experience,
Yeah. And I think it's really important to continue talking about that as we're talking about why can't we get out of this pit, right? That there's a lot of research that shows that this issue of how women are viewed and how much it can impact their self-worth and their ultimate career trajectory is not resolved when there are women in positions of leadership, right? Research shows that's not the solution, right? That we get women to the point of where they're in the leadership and then we'll reach down and pull everybody up, right? Like, it's not as simple as that. And so, it is about talking about it. It is about, addressing it. And by no means, I love your lighthouse analogy, but I would never think that about myself, right? That I was a light in the dark for someone else.
No lighthouse knows that it's a lighthouse.
Yeah. But I think about it a lot. And I really do, especially because there are women on my team who this is their first compliance job. It's part of how we do business because of it. And it's something that I'm talking to my male leaders on my team about. You can't have this conversation and you don't understand why you can't have this conversation. It really can do damage, long-term damage, if we don't approach this in the right way. If the feedback is simply, they said you were mean. What does that mean? I remember what that felt like. I will never in my life forget what that felt like when other female leaders were the ones saying these things about me instead
Isn't
of
that
reaching
wild?
down and helping me. No one offered to help me. Those female leaders were really awful to me, and it did long-term damage. And I will never be in the room and let that happen. I can't.
Well, I mean, how many times are you going to get bitten by a snake before you're like, I need to stay away from snakes, And they all might look like snakes after getting kind of betrayed like that. I mean, so very, it's a very inspiring story because so many other people in that position may have just never burst out of that, never broken out of that, and been jaded and been sort of downtrodden their whole lives. I want to go to this, when you took over your current program, you said that it had kind of a negative connotation or kind of a negative reputation. So I'd like to talk about like what specific steps did you take? Like, how did you recognize that? Like, what was that like? Because that was kind of a revelation, I'm sure. And then what specific steps did you start taking? How did you start engaging with the business in a different way to start to change that reputation or change the brand of your program?
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to walk into a position that had a consultant working with the organization on evaluating the compliance program and some recommendations for moving forward. So I didn't take the job without knowing that I was walking into a situation where the department had a bad reputation. So I'm very grateful that everyone was pretty upfront about that. The fact finding then that happened those first couple of months and the things that people were telling me, really solidified that. I think that I did not totally understand how deeply ingrained that reputation was, though, and how hard it was going to be to change. And so, there had been a break between my predecessor and me. And there was a consultant who was doing a lot to repair relationships and talk about what compliance was before I started. You'd think that would have moved the needle a little bit, that distance and somebody else, but it didn't, honestly. And I think people were very wary of me coming in and saying, that's not how I approach things. This is not going to be a police state. This is not going to be an I've caught you in something. And we are going to be talking about hard things sometimes, but I'm here to help you. And this is a partnership. They didn't believe me, right? I will say though, silver lining of the pandemic, I started on January 4th or 5th of 2020. And so these are the conversations I was having. And then we were thrown in, 2 weeks into March to this scenario. I do think that being all thrown into the fire together and there being so many compliance related issues with the pandemic that I kind of got to step up and have those conversations and partner with them. How are we going to implement telehealth? What does this look like? How do we get the information to our doctors about what is covered, what isn't covered, all the things? It was just lucky. I got a chance to interact with them in a crisis and be helpful in a crisis that a lot of people don't get in their entire tenure in an organization. That helped, right? We are an organization, though, of people who've worked in our organization for years. 10 years are 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And one of the things that is perplexing to me is that for some things, institutional memory is long.
Yeah, it's wild.
Other things, it's short, right?
Yeah.
But for the negative, it's long because we are all wired to remember the bad before we remember the good, right? And so overcoming the bad is an ongoing struggle, right? And no matter what kind of relationships you have with people, no matter how many people find you helpful and say, gosh, Kate was super helpful in this scenario, we'll make sure to include her. That doesn't always translate to reputational change, right? So we're a little over 5 years in. I think we have moved the needle significantly, but there's always that person who picks up the phone when you call and is like, what's wrong? What did I do? What am I in trouble? Like, whoa,
take it easy.
Why are you approaching me like that? And again, like those are the times where you have to think like, don't let the elephant come out. Don't let the Hulk come out. I was like, why? Like so defensive. Why would you approach me? And I just, yeah, sorry. Hey, not calling you about anything bad. Just want to, and it's just person by person and interaction by interaction. And, one of the other really hard things I think is being able to articulate the benefit that compliance brings to an organization. And so it is a lot of, we have a privacy issue we're dealing with. Is it reportable? What happens, right? Mandatory education. Like these are the top things that compliance is associated with, right? And they're not things I don't want to be associated with the 20 health stream modules you have to do this year for mandatory education. They're not all mine, but so I do think it's an ongoing process. And I just kind of didn't realize that the rebrand and then the new people, the new approach, the new everything to support the rebrand wasn't enough. I thought, isn't it fixed? No.
Yeah.
It's naive, right? But
So like, you said that there was this sort of interim compliance consultant that was in there. Why do you think the needle didn't move with that person?
Well,
Do you think it was just a bunch of talk that no one believed, or what? Like, and how long were they kind of in? Tell me about that little transition.
yeah, they were in there for about 18 months, but not full time. So it was very
Fractional. Yeah.
very part-time, only on site, maybe one day a month, which pre-pandemic was, crazy.
Totally. Yeah.
Not the norm. And really kind of originally charged with keeping things going, keeping the staff feeling okay after kind of a rough patch. And so I think the work to dig into what are we doing? What do we need to change? How do we show up differently? It was kind of surface level, and not by fault of the consultant. That just kind of wasn't what she was charged with. And there were kind of more important things that they wanted her to do and were appropriate for her to do. So I think the part that was hard was that the frontline staff who had been there through this situation and through the years of kind of building that bad reputation also thought that she had fixed it, right? So that when I got there and was sort of like, hey, part of our initiative, or part of our goals this year have to be rebuilding relationships. Like, oh, she already did that, so I think that's part of why the needle didn't move. And I think it's hard when institutional change has to happen for somebody who's not there permanently every day, part of the team, and viewed as that could really make a dent.
Something that I think you're good at and you seem to drive with your team is kind of this reframing the narrative on why compliance is not the bad guy, why compliance is here to help. So I'd like to talk a little bit about like how you help instruct your team to reframe that narrative every chance they get, and how you've been able to kind of incorporate that sort of elevator pitch for compliance, and how we're here to help. Like, what does that look like? What is that little pitch, and how do you help to kind of move that narrative?
Yeah, so part of our onboarding process is always going to be, this is what our role is, and this is how we approach that role, and to try to reinforce it as much as we can. I want compliance to be seen as a partner. It's interesting because I think, the why is compliance important? You could say all the things that, we say in trainings and that are important for people to know. It's expected by the federal government. It helps reduce penalties and fines. It creates a culture of compliance. But one of the things that I've been thinking about, even since the last time we've spoken, is sort of people want to work for companies they believe are doing the right thing. And customers want to engage with companies that are doing the right thing. With the political climate right now, look at the boycotts and the blackouts that are happening even right now, right? People are boycotting companies that don't align with their values in a way that I'm not sure we've seen so forcefully, so widespread in the past. And compliance is part of setting that reputation of integrity, of doing the right thing, of being a company that you want to work for and that you want to be a customer of. And so I think that's really, the reputational impact has always been in the elevator pitches for compliance people. But to me, right now, that is more telling and more important than anything. And if you have employees who wouldn't recommend their friends come work for your organization, it
says everything.
You're in trouble, right? You're going to have trouble staffing. You're in trouble. Compliance is a part of that. And believing that when problems come up, because they will, every organization is going to have problems. Every organization is going to have people who unintentionally and intentionally do the wrong thing. But if you've got a process and a structure in place to make people feel like this is a company that I feel good about working for, what's more valuable than that? That's what we do.
Do you feel like leadership's starting to get what you're talking about?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, the culture at every organization is different. And just like we are all shaped by our own experiences, every leader is shaped by their experience with previous compliance people, previous compliance programs. And at the end of the day, there are amazing certification programs, but there's no training for being a compliance officer, right? There's no bachelor's degree in compliance. And a lot of the training is, quite frankly, detached from what it's really like to be a day-to-day compliance officer. So
it's like, that book, What to Expect When You're Expecting? Right. That doesn't capture what pregnancy's like. You know what I'm saying?
No, of course not. And it's the same of, I went to law school, but it didn't train me to be a lawyer, right?
It's the same thing.
So there's very few training grounds that really do that. And I think it's hard. I do think leadership approach is changing, but compliance is done differently everywhere. Compliance is viewed differently everywhere. It sits higher up in some places, lower down in other places. So the inconsistency, I think, is a disservice to all of us, and is hard. I think training your leaders is as important as the annual training boxes that we check for our frontline employees. For a leader to understand what the compliance role is and what their role in the compliance program is, and what their role is when things go wrong, when the compliance program is saying, hey, we have an initiative that probably is risky because of these statutes, and you're going to say, I accept the risk of that, right? The business owns the risk or whatever that is. Do you understand what that really means, right? And if you don't, I haven't done my job. And so if you don't understand what that means, you ask me. That's what I'm here for, right? So training your leaders, what's my role, what's your role, and how do we do this together, I think is just as important. And that's how you start getting leaders on board. Leaders are not always in the room when we do the good things, though, right? And so the other piece is, I think, the other leaders in the organization, your middle management, when things go well, when we're helpful, when we're good partners, it's so helpful for them to say so. The same way, it's helpful as a manager to remember to praise your employees, right? When they do something good. It's so easy. There's an issue we have to address. It's easy to go by someone doing something amazing and not acknowledging it, because we expect you to be good at your job, right? We expect you to show up and do what you're supposed to do. You got to remember to say those good things. And so what I've tried to do is, when I have somebody who's engaging really positively with me or one of my teams, I reach out to that person, their manager, and I say, so-and-so is a rock star today. We couldn't have gotten through this, right? And so I try to create that culture, even with the operational leadership, with the hope that they'll reciprocate, right? And they'll not only praise my team, but they'll praise the function when that's due.
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't like to go to one of their people on their team and say, hey, I just heard something great about you? You know what I'm saying? You've created that moment,
I did it this morning for one of my team members. I woke up early and I was thinking about, I need to send this email. And I thought, you know what? As soon as my day gets started, I'm going to forget this. I'm going to email her right now and say, I spoke to so-and-so yesterday. They said you were amazing in this meeting. You've done an amazing job. Thank you for what you do for our team. We appreciate you, and are so happy that you're here.
You made that person's day. They're
I
having a
did make her
phenomenal
day.
Friday now.
Yeah, she emailed me and said it was the best way to start her day, and thank you. But I would have forgotten to do it if I didn't do it when I remembered to do it. So
yeah, if you weren't so intentional about trying to create this kind of a vibe and this kind of a culture, then that could have easily kind of fallen by the wayside,
And it's a full-time job. Like, I think that's
It
the
is,
other
yeah.
piece that is important to remember. It's very hard to create that kind of environment for your people, for your own staff and people you're mentoring or managing. It's hard, right? Because we've all got 20 other things to do every minute of every day. And so you have to be intentional about it and really try to keep it top of mind.
So, you've said that changing a compliance culture can be difficult. You've had some success with it. You've seen a couple of different setups and all of that. What advice would you give a compliance leader who's trying to transform their organization's culture? What words of encouragement would you give them? What kind of frameworks would you give them to drive some of the kind of change that you've been able to experience?
Yeah. I mean, some of them are easy and you hear from anybody, right? The why, how did we get here? What happened? Help me understand the things that you experienced that led to this kind of culture issue. Obviously, you have to do that to change it, right? Put your money where your mouth is. Don't just say you're going to be a partner, but show up as a partner. And when you are not showing up as a partner, or when you have shown up in a way that is not how you want to show up, just vocalize that, right? Like, there's so much power in saying,
totally.
You know what? I didn't show up in that meeting today.
Hey, my Hulk came out,
My Hulk came out. Or, I've had scenarios where I've also been intentionally a little bit more assertive. And I thought about that, and this is how I'm gonna approach this for this reason. Sometimes I talk to the leadership in that meeting and I say, listen, this isn't my normal approach, but here's why I think we need to take a little bit of a harder line on this, right? And I contextualize it. Here's what's led up to this, and here's why I think we need to be on the same page. So I think the lack of willingness to say that and to say I didn't show up as my best self today, or like, hey, I'm struggling. This week, for example, I took a couple days off last week. And so you know what that's like when you come back and it's chaotic and you can't keep up. And I could see myself getting really frustrated and getting kind of snippy in my head, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, okay, I got to be really intentional about making sure this doesn't come through on an email or it doesn't come through in a meeting. And the power of saying to someone on a meeting, you know what, today's been a day. And I'm really trying, but this is hard. This is hard right now. And maybe we need to talk another time, or, can we circle back to this when I've had a little bit better headspace to think about how we're going to approach this. I don't know why we're so unwilling to just say that and say, I'm having a bad day. I don't think I'm going to be able to show up in a way that will be productive for all of us, and so
it's got to be that self-preservation thing. There has to be some fear that we have of like showing up authentically in our full humanity,
Yeah. So I think the other thing is that as you're trying to transform an organization's culture, that same thing of just vocalizing, I understand that we've not shown up for you in the way that you needed or in a way that was productive. Here's what we're going to do to change it. I think pretending like it didn't happen, or pretending like, it didn't do damage and we're just all going to start fresh and it's a clean slate, is hard and really sets you up for failure. I think the other advice is to keep at it and know that it's an ongoing process. Like I said, we're a little over 5 years into my role and that culture shift. And it is still a priority for me every day that we establish who we are and what our values are and how we help the organization. That can't be forgotten. So that has to be part of how you approach all of the conversations. And and how you present yourself. So it's ongoing, continuous improvement, right? I mean, that should be true for everything. It's not a one and done.
Yeah, it can always get better, and you're never going to reach perfection, but you have to pursue it. You have to keep pushing forward. I love that advice. Kate, this was really phenomenal. I had high hopes after our pre-call, but this knocked it out of the park. So thank you so much. Where can people find you, Kate? Just your home address would be great. Just kidding.
Yeah, no problem. Find me on LinkedIn, of course, and I'm at SIU Medicine, and happy to connect with anybody. Always happy to be a sounding board for people, or connect you with resources and just get to know you. The more we talk and the more we know each other in this space, the better we will all be and can learn from each other. So please reach out. And I really appreciate you having me to have this conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much. This was a lot of fun, and congratulations. You're now an informal mentor to thousands. Okay, very good.
Great. I love it. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.